let's jump right in and talk about character sets. And not everyone uses the Latin alphabet. In fact, we're here in Asia, and that's a very good example of people that don't use the Latin alphabet. And the SWIFT MT standard and many other applications that process payments and securities are limited to Latin characters. So joining us to discuss what are the implications, the challenges of this, how we address and find solutions to this problem, we're now joined by our panel of esteemed guests. Let me introduce you to these three gentlemen. They are Mike Tagai, Managing Director of Industry Issues. He's an executive at JP Morgan. Also with us is Stephen Lindsay, Head of Standards Development at SWIFT. And last but not least, Christian Westerhaus, Head of Product Management Financial Institutions at Deutsche. Let's talk about the fact that, you know, a lot of people in Asia, Mike, don't actually use the Latin alphabet. Why would they? And so that obviously throws up some interesting problems, challenges, I should say, for you within having to deal with your clients.
Right. So I guess if you put your mind in a SWIFT setting, we're used to English being the business language and Latin characters, alphanumeric, being the data to be transported. But when you look at the domestic banking, each economy would have their own character set. You can imagine a bank having their customer data file populated in local characters. And if you take Japanese characters, you have a Chinese version, you have 2 Japanese characters, and you may also have alphanumeric. So when you take domestic banking and cross over to cross-border, you start to realize that the other side of the cross-border chain may not have the capability to process your own character, but on the other hand, you see Asian economies rising, and you see that there's more increased trade flows. So there's this natural, say, interest to have your counterparty accept your national character set as opposed to the functional English. So maybe I'll start from there.
Okay, let's go to you, Christian, because we're finding similar situations in Europe as well. I mean, there are lots of differences, I would say, across European countries with different character sets.
Yeah, and here the SEPA development may serve as one example that has been built purely on Latin character sets as the common denominator. Obviously, for some countries, this doesn't solve entirely the end client base, in particular private individuals and also smaller companies that are used to their local character sets. Yet what has been agreed in SEPA is Latin characters is the common denominator, and to ease that situation in some countries, I understand banks and other participants have worked to support non-Latin characters in addition, but only on the basis of the Latin character set.
So what can be done?
Well, this is an interesting question because from a standards point of view, the character set issue is pretty well solved. We have Unicode, which is a standard for setting out a code for all the different characters that we need. And we have XML standards which use Unicode, which can be used to transmit that information. But the problem is within the systems, that information has to pass through. Very, very often those systems are legacy, they can be built on old architectures, and they're not able to cope with the characters and just to pass them through. So we have to look for some workarounds. I mean, there are several out there. In China, they use Chinese commercial codes and so on. But what we're trying to do at SWIFT is to find ways to take those workarounds and bring some standardization to those.
What actually Stephen alluded to is not just the individual bank, but if you look at cross-border payments, you have a long chain of actors. You have the originating bank, the intermediary bank, the beneficiary bank, and you want to make sure that the data really travels safely. And in my mind, it has to be screened properly, processed properly, recorded and reported. So all these things have to be in the menu, if I may say.
I fully concur with that view. It requires an end-to-end thinking and integrating thinking, going beyond the pure standard question. It is a commercial question, how to link up between smaller clients and large multinationals in their payments streams. It is a huge and massive question of compliance and sanctions screening. And here we don't want to see any room for interpretations. It's also a question of market infrastructures and how they work. Here, a better international integration would certainly help. I would see Swift in a potential position to support market infrastructures here, like you've done in Europe with our high value and even low value market infrastructures in terms of how do we communicate. We do this via Swift. And if there on the market infrastructure side support could be given, ultimately it might be even good for Swift. We heard yesterday or the day before yesterday in the opening plenary, Asia is 25% of all GDP, but in terms of Swift ratio, it's only 12% of the global market. So this could be a lever to have even more Swift adoption.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we completely understand that. I think that finding ways to allow Swift messages to serve people locally in their local language is something that we really are keen to do.
How far away are we from that?
Well, like I say, sorry.
Well, I just wanted to elaborate on the challenges that Christian brought up about sanction screening.
Yeah.
For example, there's a market practice that is about to evolve in this region, which converts Chinese character into 4 numerical codes. But if you can imagine, if a client comes in with 120 numbers claiming that it's a Chinese code, can you screen that against an OFAC sanctions list? And all those things become a challenge where you need a set of standards and not just market practice to get there. But in terms of how to solve it, I guess we need like a pilot program, get the right people around the table, because this is not just about transporting character sets.
Who would be the right people around the table?
Well, first of all, Swift is this, agenda setter. They provide the forum and they provide the network. So, so it's going to be what, the banks, the clients. It could be the package vendors, and potentially the people that interact with the regulators. So compliance officers have to be around. And it is a very, very, very huge undertaking.
It's a complicated problem, and it's certainly not going to be solved overnight. I think what we hope to see is small incremental steps towards a complete solution, but we want to make sure that those steps are taken in different places and at different times, but they're heading in the same direction. So as trying to coordinate that effort means that we do try to put the same solutions in where they can be made to work.
Again, start with the bottleneck. That is not only the standard, but compliance. Bring in compliance people and experts as of day one when you scope such a project and build the terms of reference.
Yes.
When you go into this really develops in bilateral corridors. So, for example, you can hear that there's going to be a Taiwan mainland China corridor. So there will be a specific set of users using that corridor, but they have to agree whether they want to use the Taiwanese Chinese character or the mainland Chinese character.
I don't want to be in the middle of that one.
Which is a different ISO code, and it could have a different translation and all those things. But you have to identify a corridor and get the right people around the table to start discussing these things.
Yes, exactly. And from our point of view is people at the ends of those corridors, we need to make sure that what they develop in that context will work in other contexts as well. So that as these corridors start to join up into larger interoperating groups, that the standards work together.
So if you don't mind, Christian and I developed a white paper several years ago with the Payments Market Practice Group. It's called PMPG, and it's a white paper on how we can enter into dialogue about these character sets. It's a historical document now, but I think it's
still relevant.
Pointing at the right directions.
Yes.
And in addition to what we did maybe 5 years ago on this one, got to take into account the end client view as of the beginning. For example, of multinational companies that are based in those countries with their production site, take into account new developments with regard to supply chain finance and what the requirements would be over there. So go beyond the core basic plain vanilla payments piece and think about where the biggest needs are.
Right. It's interesting because 5 years ago when we were talking about sanctions, we were talking about Arabic used in the sanctions list as opposed to the other end. But now we're talking about how to populate a terrorist name in Latin characters or Arabic and such, and potentially Chinese. So the issue is becoming more visible, and I think it's just about the right time to start discussing about these things.